Welcome back, everyone. Today, we'll be discussing aesthetics, or the philosophy of art, which has been on the back burner for quite some time now, and since at least 2 people want me to make this video, I thought it was about damn time I just made it. So instead of the classic structure of asserting a premise and then following it with supporting evidence, I thought instead we would go on a journey, starting with the socialist philosopher and psychologist, John Dewey. And yes, I'm going to be doing a voiceover for this entire video because art. In his book, Art as Experience, Dewey begins by explaining how experience is a continuous interaction between environmental conditions and living organisms. Experience, in every way, shape, and form, is inseparable from the process of living. He explains how, to a thinking organism, perceptions and the ideas that formulate in response to the perceptions are in a process of constant development, like a hue, if you will. He puts an emphasis on relations. The relationship between the living being and the environment, the relationship between perceptions and ideas, the relationship between what is done, what is undergone, and perception, the inseparable relationship between perception and emotion, and finally, coalescing in the comparison between perception and creation. In other words, every aspect of experience is a constant, continual process, one that is not simply perceived but created by the brain and sensory receptors. Anything created by this living being is born from the relationship of all the things that create experience. Hence, art cannot be anything but the expression of experience. In fact, Dewey believes that the artist, in the process of creating art, replicates the process of experience by connecting what has already been done and what is to be done next, while considering all the necessary relations of the process. Well, if experience is in fact art, would we be doing it justice by settling for the word of a straight white male? I think not. The next step in our journey will be the feminist perspective. Christine Battersby, in her book Gender and Genius, Towards a Feminist Aesthetics, chronicles a long history of male cultural dominance and the suppression of feminine creativity. Rousseau had apparently stated that women possessed no artistic sensibility nor genius. It was typical of the time to represent women, as Battersby puts it, metaphorically frigid and hence creatively sterile. The writer Gerard Manley Hopkins had seen art as being phallic. The pen was a metaphorical penis, and creativity was a specifically male gift. Renoir believed that women were meant for artistic display as opposed to artistic invention. Ruskin believed that women were born housekeepers. John Jackson Jarves believed that women pick fields that require the least expenditure of mental capital. The virility school of creativity was explicitly masculine and included such figures as Picasso, Jackson Pollock, Hemingway, Henry Miller, and Mailer. Their influences were drawn from mythologies of patriarchal power. Battersby goes on to list more historical artists and thinkers who were either implicitly or explicitly opposed to the existence of feminine creativity or genius, and then moves on to the story of Anais Nin. Nin was a writer, mostly in the first-person diary genre, and had described her trials and tribulations concerning her need to express her creativity, but she had internalized the popular notion of her time that women could not be creative. She begrudgingly accepted her role as a mere writer of diaries. In as far as experience goes, what other type of experience might be lacking representation in general culture? In his paper titled Black Aesthetics, philosopher Paul Taylor describes how the black experience since the transatlantic slave trade influenced both the art that came out of black communities and the representation the art had in general culture, as well as the representation of the people themselves depicted in culture. First, Taylor had to make an important distinction by defining what black was intended to mean in the context of black aesthetics. Making a reference to the philosopher W.E.B. Du Bois, Taylor describes the context of black being not a reference to the color of skin, but instead an inherently political, social, and cultural racialization, an othering, or a process of alienation, if you will. This is to be seen as distinct from pre-modern African art and culture, because it marks a shift after being dehumanized in the slave trade in which their lives were thrust into a political existence, one that shaped all of their experience, and hence found its way into all the art and culture created by black communities from that point forward. Paul Taylor goes on to list the historical developments that led to the creation of black aesthetics, starting with creolization, in which the slave trade caused cultural collisions between the African culture carried with the slaves and whatever culture was held by the society that the slaves were taken to. Some examples Taylor gives include the religious rituals of Vodun and Santeria, and other cultural artifacts like the music of Rara, reggae, and the performance of capoeira. The second development, according to Taylor, is civilizationism, which occurred in the 18th and 19th centuries, and was characterized by the black community adopting European styles in response to the view of African savagery and the belief that they needed to be civilized. Some examples of black artists and writers during this stage of development include Phyllis Wheatley, Frederick Douglass, and Fisk Jubilee singers. Third development Taylor calls counter-modernity, which was a response to modernity and an attempt to find a space for a black bourgeoisie. Two popular movements during this period were the New Negro and Negrotide movements of the 30s and 40s. Some influential figures of these movements include W.E.B. Du Bois, Aimé, Suzanne Césaire, Zora Neale Hurston, and Elaine Locke. Also during this stage of development, a working-class feminist blues aesthetic had popped up in contrast to the bourgeois, counter-modern aesthetic in such figures like Bessie Smith and Gertrude Rainey. The development following this is that of decolonization, which according to Taylor came in two parts. The first is that of black nationalism. This is characterized as a complete rejection of white aesthetic principles. Some examples of figures given for this stage of development include Amiri Baraka, Sonia Sanchez, Addison Gale, Leopard Senghor, Kwame Nkrumah, Nikki Giovanni, Bob Marley, Miriam Makeba, and James Brown. The second part includes that of feminist and queer theory. Important figures during this phase consist of Morrison, Alice Walker, Toni Cade Bambara, Michelle Wallace, Audre Lorde, Ntozake Shange, Howardina Pindell, and Betty Saar. This finally brings us to the latest stage of development, aptly titled post-blackness. Taylor characterizes this stage as one that becomes skeptical of the efficacy of racial identification, and instead embraces intersectional analyses of culture. Examples of artists during this stage of development include Appiah, Lewis Gordon, Kara Walker, and Trey Ellis. Speaking of queer theory and intersectionalism, what about the trans experience in aesthetics? Actually, after asking this question, see ContraPoints. There. Work done. So, after this journey through various examples, it would seem evident that there was, in fact, an intrinsic connection between art and experience. However, it wouldn't be entirely fair if I didn't remark on at least one counter-proposal. Linda Nochlin gave her perspective in Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists, concerning what essentially defined art and the root causes surrounding the apparent lack of great women artists. To quote Nochlin, she states, "The problem lies not so much with some feminists' concept of what femininity is, but rather with their misconception, shared with the public at large, of what art is, with the naive idea that art is the direct personal expression of individual experience, a translation of personal life into visual terms. She claims that art instead is simply a learned, materially based language form free from temporal conventions." However, if we took Dewey's argument seriously, we would inevitably come to the conclusion that it is not possible for us to create anything without perceptual experience. And however true this may be, Linda makes an important distinction. Although art cannot exist without experience, not all experience is art. So what does Linda mean by her definition of art? What is it that determines what experiences are worthy of being art? Why, in fact, are there no great women artists? The answer for her can be summed up in this quote. "But in actuality, as we all know, things as they are, and as they have been, in the arts as in 100 other areas, are stultifying, oppressive, and discouraging to all those, women among them, who do not have the good fortune to be born white, preferably middle class, and above all, male. She goes on to describe how social institutions, along with educational institutions, have played a huge role in forming us and dictating our positions in society. Institutional structures decide who it is to become an artist. Institutional structures decide what it is to be considered art. This, fortunately for us, isn't actually antithetical to Dewey's theory. Dewey was very explicit concerning the role of capitalism and the effects of our social institutions on art and culture. Dewey believed that the tendency to evaluate everything in terms of value in our capitalist system was what led the institution of art to organize expressions of experience in an exclusionary, hierarchical manner. In addition to this, Dewey believed that art and capitalism had to necessarily become sanitized. Imagination and creativity, according to Dewey, were by their very nature subversive, and capitalism, by its very need to maintain order in order to continually perpetuate itself, had to protect the status quo. Art and capitalism are inherent contradictions. They are continually at odds with each other, and because of this, Dewey believed that art had a liberatory or revolutionary potency, and that this power could be concentrated to overcome capitalism. What about the role of art in post-revolutionary society? A good answer to this question can be found in Peter Kropotkin's book, The Conquest of Bread. I bet you didn't expect this twist. Kropotkin, scientist, philosopher, and anarcho-communist, believed, like Dewey and Nochlin, that capital and the state stifles art. Unlike Dewey and Nochlin, though, Kropotkin analyzes how art will be able to fully express itself in the post-capitalist world. Kropotkin states, "As we must recognize that man has other needs besides food, and as the strength of anarchy lies precisely in that it understands all human faculties and all passions, and ignores none, we shall, in a few words, explain how man can contrive to satisfy all his intellectual and artistic needs." Kropotkin calculated that all material needs could be met if all members of society only contributed 4 to 5 hours labor per week. Essentially, what this means is that there will be quite a lot of leisure time. Given this leisure time and the abolishment of all the unnecessary restrictions thrust upon the average human being by capitalism, it is possible for every member of society to become a producer and receive the education necessary to cultivate art to its furthest potential. And art will be an integral aspect of post-capitalist society, as its creation and enjoyment is recognized as an intrinsic human need experienced by everyone. Thank you, everyone. That video was specifically for Bobby Fisher. She donated to me quite a long time ago, and I've always meant to make this video for her. Finally did. It's out. I'm also sorry for taking so long with this video. I know I've been I've been really busy this month, but hopefully you guys can forgive me for that. Funny sound effects. Anyway, my one $10 patron this month is Aaron Albrighton. His name will show up on the screen. And then these are my honorary sapiens. Again, thank you very much for those who decided to donate or become a patron. I am forever in your debt. And for my parting words, join the DSA, join the IWW. It's revolution or nothing, baby. Okay, over and out. Oh, and I love you.